Nigerian Association of Petroleum Explorationists. We've had an unbelievable year, significant issues and challenges, but I think we've been able to overcome most of them. So today we'll be having one of our key partners in success, Shell, who are sponsoring a technical talk on de-risking exploration prospects in the Niger Delta using biodegradation. Without much ado, let me introduce the chairperson for the Conference Planning Committee, the current president-elect, and the person who coordinates all our continuing education series, the one and only Mrs. Patricia Umeogu. Right. Good morning, ma.
Good morning. You will not believe what happened to me today, ladies and gentlemen. Network failed me after everything. So you're all very welcome to today's meeting. We are extremely grateful to our sponsor for today, Shell. They rose up to the challenge and provided us an excellent speaker and excellent sponsorship. On behalf of NAPE, I say a big thank you. Today's event is like the last technical meeting we're going to be having before we enter the conference in a couple of weeks or thereabouts. I am delighted, extremely honored to have as our chairman for today, Dr. Kehinde Ladipo. He's been my mentor, somebody I look up to. I just looked at his CV and I see that there's a good reason why I should put him in place of a mentor. Dr. Ladipo attended University of Ibadan. Of course, they say they are the premier university and I cannot fault that. And he had his PhD at the University of Swansea in the UK. In 1976, he started his professional career in the industry with Gulf Oil, now known as Chevron. And after a short while, he went on to University of Ilorin to become one of the pioneer faculty that started the Department of Geology. By 1988, Dr. Kenny moved on to Shell, where he was until 2010, putting in a solid 22 years of excellent exploration work. Well done, sir. By 2011, he started a consultancy company called Strat Consult. And in that same year, he started something else that shows his pioneering spirit. And that is, he became the director of the Center of Excellence at Uniben. In case anybody doesn't know, they actually turn out good products. I can attest to that. And he brought a lot of passion to that assignment. Thank you, sir. And by 2015, he joined LECOIL. I give you Dr. Kehinde Ladipo, FNAPE. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear. We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you very much. My president-elect, thank you. I'd also like to thank Mr. Alex Tucker, the president,
Thank you, sir.
Shell, for, and as well as the executive of NAPE,
Thank you.
As well as the executive of NAPE for inviting me to be the chairman of this event. I appreciate the recognition and the privilege that you've given to me. It's particularly...
Can you kindly start your video, please? Thank you very much.
All right. Can you all see me now?
Not yet. Now we can.
Okay. Okay. So I was just appreciating the executive of NAPE, starting from the president, Mr. Alex Taka, the president-elect, Mrs. Patricia Ochogu, Shell Petroleum Development Company, for remembering me after almost 10, 11 years, always as usual. And it's good to continuously be in the fold of NAPE. I want to recognize the presenter of today, Kelly Ifekelunma, who incidentally was one of my early students at the Center of Excellence, University of Benin. So I look forward to speaking to what the speaker is going to tell us 10 years after I left the organization. Biodegradation is, of course, something that is very, very important. Within the same well, different reservoir levels have different oil qualities, and it's very important to be able to predict. That's the whole idea about forward modeling and forward prediction. Is one of the key risks, issues that we need to de-risk in exploration prospects. If I can just briefly introduce Ifekelunma. She has a BSc degree from University of Port Harcourt, and proudly an MSc from the Center of Excellence in Integrated Petroleum and Exploration and Evaluation, University of Benin. After her MSc degree, she joined Shell in 2015 and has since worked in production geology and exploration geoscience, different roles. In those different roles over the last 5-6 years, she has brought into value to the top of the table different aspects of reservoir geology, reservoir prediction, and structure. Structure and sedimentation go together. And more importantly, the geochemical aspects in predicting biodegradation. What I see very interesting here is is now bringing it all within the context of play-based evaluation, which is a routine procedure that we all apply now in subsurface evaluation. Kelly, as we sometimes call her, has championed several activities in NAPE. She was the editor of the Young Professionals Editorial Committee in 2019, and she's part of the current conference planning committee on behalf of Shell. Let me welcome Ifekelunma Umeogu to present her talk. Thank you.
Can you unmute, please?
All right, I'm sorry. So thank you everybody for the kind words that you said. Thank you, Dr. Kenny. It's a pleasure to see you again and to hear your voice after quite a while in COE. And thanks to the President-elect for opening. And I will just go ahead to share my screen now. Okay, I think someone is still sharing. All right. All right, Latif, can you confirm you can see my screen?
Every sound is good, video is good, presentation is good.
Okay. So once again, good morning, good day to everyone in wherever location you are. And I want to thank you so much for making out this time to be part of this presentation on the risking exploration prospects for biodegradation in the Niger Delta. Before I go any further, I just would like to do a virtual touch base and ask us to make sure that wherever we are joining this call, that we are not maybe driving or in some kind of situation that might impede our concentration on either task. And I would also ask that we have, we're sure that we can hear any external emergencies during the course of this presentation, just to make sure that we are safe during while we take part in this NAPE technical session. Now, back to my presentation. While I would be speaking on this topic, I haven't worked on it alone. I worked on it together with some of my colleagues who are listed on this slide. We have Ebimo Bowe-Wodu, who is a petrophysicist, Festus Obonna, who is a reservoir engineer, and Stella Ebe, who is an exploration geoscientist. All of us are working for the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited. And once more, I would like to say a big thank you to Shell for sponsoring this event and for giving us the trust to present some of our work to a large audience. Thank you so much, NAPE, too, for accepting and making it possible for us to share what we have done. I would ask that while we listen, that we please take note of comments that I would like to share at the end of the presentation, as well as questions, and I would be happy to spend some time afterwards to answer, to respond to these. Now, this next slide is essentially a disclaimer slide that just sheds some light on some of the terminologies and statements that may be used during the course of this presentation. In view of time, I would not be spending a lot of time on it. I will be moving forward to the next aspect of the presentation, and that's really to talk about what you're going to expect to see during this presentation. So first of all, I would lay out the reason for why we have carried out this piece of work. I would give a preamble on the Niger Delta and biodegradation, and then I will talk about the basis for the biodegradation modeling that we have used in this work. I would also show some recent applications in prospect evaluation in Shell, where we have done this over the recent past. Before I wrap up, I would be talking about some of the impacts of biodegradation on a project's life cycle that's looking a bit outside of the core exploration related impacts. And then I would share the key learnings and conclude. Now to the objectives. The first point here is stating the reason we have done this, which was targeted to improving our understanding of the basin. And this really was leveraging on studies that have been done in the Niger Delta, both in Shell and outside of Shell. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call have contributed in one way or the other to the knowledge base we have on the Niger Delta hydrocarbon system. Another point we wanted to address was a way of providing a quick assessment of the likelihood of biodegradation. And through the method which I will be showing, I would also be talking about how we can do a quick assessment in some fields or areas where maybe you don't have detailed geochemical studies or you don't have a basin model. This is a quick way to assess your biodegradation risk. The other objective listed here is a way for us to apply biodegradation as a de-risking approach to optimizing our decision quality. And this is looking at the broader impact of our decisions and how it could affect HSC, our project promise, and the overall commercial value that we bring in as businesses. In a forward-looking objective, the intent was to embed this de-risking approach as a strategy for maturation work going forward for most of our prospective areas. And to state the final objective, it was for developing technical competences. Most of us that took part in this work are not subject matter experts, but we took it as an opportunity to learn some more about geochemistry and integrate these in our day-to-day role to better understand and generate integrated results for our prospect maturation. Now, just to give a quick overview, and here I know I'll be saying some things that are very familiar to a lot of us on the call, but for those of us that don't know, the Niger Delta is a passive margin delta, which was formed in the late Eocene to early Oligocene, following the rifting of the African and the South American plates. Aerially, the Niger Delta is subdivided into depot belts, and these depot belts are typically bound by length growth faults. And what a lot of researchers and people who have worked in the Niger Delta have seen is that within each of the depot belts, we tend to have a lot of similarity in our structural and stratigraphic character. Now, just talking a little bit more on the stratigraphic aspects, I would like you to take your eyes to the chart towards the right-hand side of the screen. And essentially what that's showing is it's showing our three little stratigraphic formations. We have the Akata formation, which is typically the deepest little stratigraphic formation encountered, and it generally has a lot of marine shells. Overlying it, typically we would encounter the Abada formation, which is made up of fluvial marine deposits. And this is also where we tend to have most of our prospective intervals. We tend to have our reservoir seal pairs, what we typically call RSPs in shell. And above that, we would normally encounter the Benin formation, which is comprised mostly of continental sands. Now, as the Niger Delta has had a general progression through time, we also see that reflected in how our little stratigraphic formations move out towards the basin. And this chart also attempts to show how that progresses from the northeast to the southwest. We also see how our little stratigraphic formations basically transcend our time zones, and this is something that that we note in terms of the presentation, and I'll show you some of the reasons why. So now, talking about biodegradation, a lot of studies have a lot of researchers have attempted to study the concept of biodegradation, and they have also shared a lot of very insightful thoughts. One important thing I've noticed or that I read in one of the research works by Head et al. In 2003 was that it's believed that over half of the global resources in the world that are petroleum related can be affected by biodegradation. So if this is a reality in the world, and from what we have seen, it's not, the Niger Delta is not special, we also see effects of biodegradation. So the question then is, how can the knowledge of biodegradation that a lot of people have studied and shared findings on, how can it help us in de-risking our hydrocarbon fluids in our prospects and help us to make better decisions in order to meet our commitments for safe, ethical, and commercially viable exploration? That is what we have attempted to resolve in our own way. And on the boxes, the blue boxes that you see on your screen, these are showing some of the areas that we studied over the course of this work. However, I'll be showing examples from two places, one being the Central Swamp Depot Belt and the other being from the shallow offshore. So now, to share the basis for our biodegradation modeling, I'm going to move back a bit and look at what a lot of subject matter experts in the field of biodegradation have said what they have found within and outside of the Niger Delta. And for this, I would be talking a lot about what Herwig Gans et al. Found out when they did their research a couple of years back. I would also like to give acknowledgement to a lot of people who were part of that work. I know Dr. Kenny, I see your name quite a lot on most of those publications. Shegun Bilaja as well, Dr. Ejedawe, and several other people whose names are very familiar in the room. Now, we have done this because while we ourselves are not experts in the field of biodegradation, we can rely on the findings that have come out of people's research and make informed decisions on how we can model for biodegradation in our own ways. So what's biodegradation? Essentially, I would give what might be a layman's definition and hopefully easy to understand. So biodegradation essentially is the breakdown of matter due to the effect of biological organisms. And in the sense of where we'll be talking about, that is mostly in the aspect of hydrocarbon degradation, where biological organisms break down hydrocarbon matter, and they also, by doing that, they modify the physical and chemical properties of the hydrocarbon. In some aspects of geology, where you're aiming for remediation of the of maybe spills on the surface of the earth, this might be a good thing because you want the biological organisms to actually break down your organic matter. But in the subsurface, in a situation where you actually want to explore for and produce hydrocarbon, you typically do not always want to have your resources being biodegraded. So from our understanding and from what the researchers have shown, we see that the hydrocarbon field in the Niger Delta reservoirs would typically have both thermogenic and biogenic oil and gas. Biogenic oil and gas being oil and gas that has gone through processes related to biodegradation and production of either heavy oil or biogenic gas. So what Herwig Gans and the others who took part in this work found was that amongst several other influences to biodegradation, there were two very significant areas that came up. And the first was in the area of reservoir temperatures. They proposed that for a high risk of biodegradation in the reservoir, you expect to see about 60 degrees centigrade in the reservoir as the reservoir temperature and lower. While for a low risk of biodegradation, you tend to see temperatures higher than 80 degrees centigrade. They also proposed that within the band of the 60 degrees to 80 degrees centigrade, there are usually variations, with some cases seeing undegraded reservoir fluid and some seeing degraded reservoir fluid. The second aspect that they mentioned was in the area of salinity and nutrition. So for a high risk of biodegradation in a reservoir, they expected that there would be a low salinity. In other words, there would be freshwater access to that reservoir, and the reservoir would also be in an open system. And when they talk about the open system, what they have defined it as is a system where there is access to the shallower to circulating waters from shallower intervals, and these circulating waters would typically tend to bring in nutrients to feed the microorganisms, as well as taking out toxicants in the reservoir, thereby allowing the microorganisms to thrive. In a low risk salinity nutrition perspective, however, they expected that there would be a higher salinity of the reservoir. And in this case, you'll be having more or less no freshwater access, and it will be a closed system. A closed system in this case being a system where you don't have, there is no access to the shallower circulating waters that would be bringing in nutrition and taking out toxicants. I've also included a couple of references below here on some of the other researchers that have done significant work in the field of biodegradation for people who are interested. So now coming back to this correlation chart here in the center of your screen, this is, sorry, all right. So coming back to this chart in the center of the screen, this is actually an excerpt from the work of Herrigans et al. And what they have essentially shown here shows reservoir temperature in degrees centigrade. And on this scale, it's temperatures are increasing downwards. Okay, so temperatures are increasing downwards. And sorry, did someone say something? Okay, I think there's some noise on the background. So on the other axis, on the x-axis, we see an increase of API gravities from left to right. Also in the chart, you probably see these arrows indicating an increase in salinity as you go from left to right, which is equated to higher APIs. And you also see an increase in source rock maturity from left to right, which is equivalent to higher APIs. So from their work, they showed that in this band where you have low reservoir temperatures and lowered salinities, you also tend to see correspondingly low API gravities in the reservoir fluid. And by the way, I didn't mention, these dots indicate hydrocarbon samples from across the Niger Delta which they had analyzed. So we also see it. We also see a trend in this in the data plotted, and we see that it's basically shows a linear trend where towards the bottom right-hand side, we start to see that that higher reservoir temperatures with higher salinities have correspondingly higher API gravities from this scatter. So this shows us that if we can find information or proxies for information on reservoir temperatures and reservoir salinity, then just maybe we would be able to predict API gravities and risk of biodegradation in the reservoir fluids. And this is the approach that we have implemented in our applications in recent time. So I'll be moving on now to the next slide to show you how we have used these findings. So this first example is taken from the shallow offshore. And again, on the map, I will show you where that is in terms of the Niger Delta depositional setting. That's over here. And this here is a blow up of the shallow offshore fields which were analyzed in the course of this. So we have the Kwacha, we have the Ariari, and we have the Loti. Please note that these are not the real names of these fields. So the project objective was, while doing this piece of work, was to take a play-based exploration approach in order to have a holistic understanding of all play elements for these fields and the prospects within these fields, and to apply this for prospect maturation in those fields. So what have we done with the information that we gained from Herrigans and other researchers' work? What happened here was that we used 3 sources of information in order to replicate the information that to replicate the understanding that we gained from the research work that had been done. So on the first track, we have the gamma ray logs, and these gamma ray logs are basically to understand how our lithologies change and what broad lithologic setting we may be penetrating and how it might affect the results that we see. In the second track, we have the resistivity log. And as a lot of us are aware, we have resistivity being a proxy for salinity of our subsurface. So we have used the resistivity log because on the resistivity log, you can definitely see the changes on the resistivity pattern as you go from shallow to deep. And in the shallow section, we can see that excursion to the left that is really typical of the freshwater zone in the Benin Formation. In the deeper sections, that excursion starts to mean hydrocarbon presence. For the temperature logs, which was the third piece of information we plotted, this was basically a direct representation of our subsurface reservoir temperatures. And we can also see the trend from the shallow to the deep. What we have done in this interpretation exercise is to put a cutoff at 60 degrees centigrade because we want to establish a trend for the fields at 60 degrees centigrade, which is the temperature riskiest for biodegradation. So we've done that for all three wells in the representative fields. And please note the distance across these wells. It's about 28 kilometers in one and 22 kilometers in the other. So as geologists, the first thing that we would do is to make our observations. So our first observation in the area of salinity is that our freshwater zones, and by that, I'm showing you again, hopefully you can see my mouse, our freshwater zones cut off and transit into saltwater zones at roughly around 2,000 feet subsea across these three fields that are quite a distance apart. And the next thing we looked at was the trend of the temperatures. And we could see that for the temperatures to get to 60 degrees centigrade, in the Ariari and Loti fields, we were seeing that happen at about 3,000 feet subsea across these fields. However, when we moved into the Kwacha field, which is towards the western part of the same concession, we saw that we had to get to a relatively deeper depth to encounter this temperature change. And that was around 4,500 feet subsea. So after making these observations, the next thing was to make our inferences on what this meant. So the first thing that we have done, looking at the gamma ray and the resistivity logs and other information, was that we could estimate the extent of the Benin sands formations with respect to our interpretation. And we can see that it's relatively shallow and it more or less corresponds to the freshwater zone, as we have seen from the resistivity log. The Abada, as we expect, it is fluvio-marine, and we have alternating sands and shales, and that comes in below the Benin formations in all three fields. Now, in terms of the biodegradation risk, we have put in a risk template saying that we have a high risk for biodegradation in these areas where we have 60 degrees and above. And we have also put in an uncertainty band and then a low risk of biodegradation below that. So just so that we're not working in isolation and ignoring real data, we also looked for a fourth piece of information that would help us to better calibrate our results. And that came in from the Loti 4 well, where there were fluid samples at a depth of about 4,400 feet subsea, which is somewhere around here. And the API gravity of that interval was 34.6 degrees. Now, typically biodegraded reservoirs, reservoir fluids would normally see a gravity of about 23 degrees and below, while normal or unbiodegraded fluids are supposed to have higher API gravities than that. So we can see that we are in a good place for the for prospects that are around 4,400 in this area. And how was this finding relevant to the maturation team? What it did was that it helped the maturation team understand that our prospects that may be deeper than 3,000 feet subsea are likely to be risky for heavy oils or biogenic gas. And the outcome on the maturation, which is a decision taken by the maturation team, was not to pursue any targets for prospectivity that were in the risky zone for biodegradation. So moving on to the second example where this has been applied, and that is the Frankfurt updip appraisal in the onshore Niger Delta. Again, taking your eyes to where this area is. This is in the Central Swamp Depot Belt, which is shown in this blue box over here. And this is a blow up of the area that was studied, as well as some of the fields that were studied with respect to improving our understanding. So the main objective for the Frankfurt appraisal project was to have a quick, low-cost domestic gas supply, and this is for Nigeria. Now, how did we go about this? What we did essentially was to look at available data in the Escudo, Dalasi, and Sedi fields, which are nearby to the Frankfurt, and this is so that we have a holistic understanding of trends within the area with respect to the lithology and to the impact on biodegradation. So we plotted the data in available wells, and from what we can see, we're actually having less distance compared to the previous example from the shallow offshore between our well data. And the first thing that probably jumps out at everybody is the thickness of these gamma ray signatures that show thick amalgamated sand units. We can infer that they are sand units, and we can also see that correspondingly next to the gamma ray log in the resistivity, we also see that trend as we have seen in the shallow offshore, where we have this strong excursion of the resistivity log to the right, followed by a transition zone where it tends to go into lower resistivities in general. And this is repeated on basically all of the other wells that were used in this evaluation, several fields apart. So for understanding our resistivity and how it translates to salinity, we have taken a similar approach. So we have interpreted where we believe would be the base of the freshwater in all of the wells, and this translates to all of the fields as well. And roughly, this comes to about 6,500 feet subsea. In some wells, like the Escudo, it comes to about 7,000 feet subsea, but plus or minus 1,000 feet difference in the depth to the base of the freshwater zone. Now, for the temperature boundary, again, this temperature cutoff has been applied at the 60 degrees mark, and this is consistent. This is a consistent application on all the fields that have the temperature data. So what we see here again is that the temperatures don't get to 60 degrees until at about 8,000 feet or 8,000 feet and 7,500 feet subsea in all of the wells, really. And well, these were our observations. So next, I showed the inferences we made from these observations. The first inference, which I've alluded to, is that the Benin sands are significantly thicker in this set of wells than they are in the shallow offshore, while the Abada is coming in slightly deeper than they were in the shallow offshore example. The second thing is that our zones for high risk, moderate risk, and low risk of biodegradation, especially as relates to temperature, which appears to have the stronger influence here. We were able to place the band of high risk of biodegradation at about 8,000 feet subsea, approximately. Bringing in an extra piece of information, the fourth piece of information from the fluid samples from the SEDI field and the Escudo field, we see that in the SEDI field, we have at about 7,900 feet subsea an API gravity of 21.3 degrees. And that is somewhere around here, close to the base of where we had interpreted where we had interpreted the base of biodegradation from our model. In the Escudo well, at about 11,600 feet subsea, somewhere down here, we have an API gravity of 47. So we see that relatively we are close. In fact, we are pretty close to what the fluid samples have seen in terms of our model versus the actual data from the subsurface. Now, what did it mean for the Frank field up-dip appraisal? These two wells here represent wells from the Frank field, and these boxes here show that for these fields, we are the prospective intervals, which are what these boxes show, are all going to be in the biodegraded zone. And that is that might have been a red flag for us. But then we remembered our objective being quick, low-cost domestic gas supply for Nigeria, and suddenly it wasn't looking that bad anymore. Because what it meant was that we would be, although we would be encountering biodegradation, when we looked at nearby wells and nearby fields to the Frank field, and these included the Sedi, Dalasi, and Escudo, what we could see was that we were predominantly in a gassy environment in this area. And so this meant that even though we were encountering potentially biodegraded fluids, there was a high chance of gas being thermogenic or biogenic gas in our prospective RSPs, and a low chance for oil. So the outcome from using this to integrate with other findings for which the prospect maturation team did was that we could de-risk the fluid type within the Frank up-dip appraisal, and also recommend that a gas-only scenario be run for this opportunity. And that is what happened going forward. So just to mention the key learnings that we took away from doing these applications, if you remember, and perhaps I go back a little bit to the shallow water offshore example, what we could see was that our biodegradation intervals were relatively shallow compared to the onshore example, where in this Ariari and Loti fields, we were seeing biodegraded intervals at about 3,000 feet subsea, and less biodegraded reservoirs at 4,400, which was which is somewhere around here. While in the same depot belt, in the same concession, we are also expecting that we will be seeing a significant change in biodegradation trend in the Kwacha field. Now, when we compared that to our other example from the Frank field up-dip, we could see that there was quite a significant change in the depths of biodegradation here, where we were seeing biodegraded reservoir fluids up to about 8,000 feet subsea. And I mean, this is between the central swarm depot belt and the shallow offshore. So key takeaway is that there could be a lot of variation, even in the same concession, in the same block concession, and in the same in the same block concession, and we could also see a lot of similarity as well. So this means that, you know, we really have to do a biodegradation analysis even for concessions that are relatively close. Even for prospects that are relatively close to each other. So that is one key takeaway. We could also see that the Abada formations were typically where we encountered a lot of these risk of biodegradation, and this is really in the upper Abada formation. And also, this is where we have most of our conventional oil and gas targets. So those are two key takeaways that we took from this piece of work. We also saw, as a third takeaway, we saw that the temperatures, the temperature band, where we got the temperatures of 60 degrees centigrade, tended to be slightly deeper than where we saw our salinity cutoffs, or in both examples. So this might not be the case for all fields, but for this field, these two fields that we are showing, this was the observations that we made. Now, just before I wrap up, I would like to share a couple of the impacts of biodegradation on project lifecycle. And this is particularly important, I believe, to geoscientists, because typically when the prospects gets drilled, for some of us that are explorers, you know, we lose sight of what might happen. So I'm going to be sharing a couple of areas that I think are important for us to keep in mind while we do our exploring in Nigeria, especially when we're exploring in our conventional Abada intervals. So the first thing is in the area of HSC. So biodegraded fluids are typically associated with some with a couple of undesirable products. One of that is CO2. And CO2, as we know it, is detrimental to our environment in terms of the increased accumulation. And globally, there is a lot of pull in terms of greener exploration and production, and with regards to how oil and gas operations try to combat against this. So, keeping this in mind, Shell is aiming to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 or sooner. So in terms of our biodegradation analysis, we want to be aware of the risk of greenhouse gas emissions with respect to producing and in biodegraded zones. The second aspect when we think of HSC is in terms of drilling operations, and that's around geohazards and how we plan for shallow gas. So it's very important to integrate our understanding of biodegraded zones with our plans for drilling, because it's quite likely that in some of the areas that we might be drilling past to get to our target reservoirs, we may be encountering some accumulations that are biogenic in origin, and this might lead to some shallow gas incidents. So in this next bucket, I talk about project promise, and we're looking here to things like our promise on oil and gas, talking about composition and quality of our fluids. And we know that in terms of dry gas, biogenic gas might be actually a positive. But when we look at our oil quality considerations, biodegradation can significantly affect the quality of our oil in terms of the viscosity, where it tends to become very heavy. It tends to also have some higher acidity content, and as well as some other content that makes refining more expensive and erodes at the value of the hydrocarbon fluid that you get out. So in the last aspect, really looking at value, this encompasses most of what we've talked about, but I want to highlight in the area of design, we want to proactively plan for drilling and producing from biodegraded reservoirs. And this is because for drilling into and extracting from biodegraded reservoirs, there are some considerations that you want to have in mind, especially in terms of combating against things like the viscosity of the fluid, talking about the acidity content and all of those things. So those are things that you want to know ahead before you do your well and facility design. And ultimately, all of this feeds into the commercial value of the project and the return on investment. So these are a couple of things that I thought are important for us to keep in mind, because sometimes we do the prospect maturation and we don't even, we lose track of how it goes from there. But as geoscientists, especially going into a phase where we want to be more integrated in terms of our delivery, these are things that we want to keep in mind and keep our colleagues who are going to be handling these abreast of. Now, to round up, I will be reiterating some of the learnings that I have shared during the course of this presentation. And the first thing is that, as we have seen, the understanding of biodegradation risk is very important to the commercial value of our prospects and leads. I think that has come out very clearly, I hope. The next thing is that our opportunities, which are in the upper Abada formation, are best targeted through this approach. And when I say upper Abada formation, it becomes a little bit relative, because from what we can see, the upper Abada formation where there is biodegradation can vary quite significantly across depot belts and even within depot belts. Now, the last two learnings that I just want to share again around the biodegradation depth variation, which I've already alluded to. So this is why it's quite important for us to carry out a case-specific analysis of biodegradation in order to make the best decisions regarding our exploration and maturation. And I hope you have also seen how easy this approach is to replicate in terms of risking opportunities and optimizing our business decisions. Now, in closing, I would just like to reiterate that biodegradation analysis indeed is a quick win approach to de-risking shallow conventional prospects. And while this analysis is a great way to de-risk your prospects, it's also very important to note that you still need to carry out your chemical analysis in order to have a more detailed understanding of the risks that you're facing, which geochemistry would help you to correctly classify and understand. We've seen in the Frank Updip appraisal that reservoir fluids in biodegraded zones don't actually spell doom for prospects. However, understanding the underlying business need is particularly of importance. It's also quite important to carefully communicate the findings that you have gotten through your biodegradation analysis, as well as the unknowns, because in those unknowns, there might still be a risk as well as an upside. So with this, I would like to wrap up my presentation, and here are my co-authors as well as myself. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this presentation. I know that a lot of people have worked very hard in this field and have more understanding on it than me or my co-authors, and I'll be happy to hear your comments, your suggestions, and your questions as well. So thank you, and back to you, Latif and Dr. Kenny.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Over to you, Dr. Kenny Ladeko.
Thank you. Kelly, it was nice to listen to you and your team. Well done. I think you have further broken down the fundamental concepts and models of biodegradation and biodegraded reservoirs into a more prospect-specific examples. What I like about it is the detailed incorporation of not just the petrophysical data, but also the reservoir engineering data. I'm sure that you have a lot more information that that lies behind the summary figures that you have presented here. Just to recap for everybody, you see, when you look at petroleum systems in the early days, it was like a parallel line to clay-based exploration. And a lot of the work that was done by Harvey Gans and the others was focused very primarily on geochemistry. So the ability to understand the key influences, which you talked about, temperature control, the hydraulics of the pore fluid, salinity, are things which the fundamental controls were clearly understood there. So following on from there, you set out the objectives of this work, which was to understand the processes and controls, optimizing the models from basin scale to field scale, which you clearly demonstrated, and use that in a predictive manner, which is always one of the primary things that are steps that an explorationist and even development geologist needs to do. You demonstrated the model based on 3 selected areas from the Niger Delta. So that, and those controls in terms of reservoir temperature, salinity, whether you are in a high risk or a low risk zone, were things that you clearly demonstrated and applied in the case studies that you presented. You can say that that's area specific. What would be nice to see going forward, excuse me, is, for example, what the structural control or controls will be on this across the depot belt, because the examples you treated from the shallow offshore, for example, and the coastal swarm and the Ughelli depot belts, those are within the depot belt, but we know that within the depot belts there are there are macro structures and petroleum systems within each one of these depot belts, and the controls on an additional control. And let's see how that can be, how that influences your predictive model on a more field-specific scale. Following on from there, you also talked about the creation of, what the importance of that cross plot in terms of APIs, distribution across a very large database, and temperature, and within it, the trends of, in that cross plot that you showed. Fantastic. It would be nice to see how your individual areas also point to where they fit into that cross plot, because that cross plot is also very important for us to understand, because the geochemical data is in that distribution plot, and the fields, those 4 quadrants or 6 quadrants that you can map out in different colors, will be nice to put into both your play model as well as your predictive framework so that you can use it as for the cross-check. Lastly, let me just, the link of that to the HSC aspect is also very enlightening, because biogenic gas is not just created as in the early maturity phase, as you have shown, but also as a result of biodegradation activities. And this model that you have presented can help us to either increase or reduce the risk of shallow gas, which you don't have to simply depend on the geophysical signatures to be able to predict and forward model shallow gas horizons, which has major implications in terms of drilling and access to our zones of interest. Finally, what I also hear from you is the extension of this early generic model that you have worked out into the project life cycle economics, and that is the beauty about having an integrated team to look at this. It's not just creating a geological model, but also you not only have the opportunity to do your post-off lift pre-drill, but also is that the cost of either incorporating shallow hazard drilling procedures or being able to reduce or increase the chance of success for the type of fluids, either gas, oil, or biodegraded reservoirs into your life cycle planning economics is also very, very important. I'd like to leave the summaries there. I know that many other companies that are listening will have their own overall hierarchy model, just like a Shell, where you have Project Promise trying to, as a means of creating value. And the same thinking, the same model will become applicable. I will now hand over back to Mr. Latif for the question and answer series. But well done, and your team. Very good listening to you. I'm sure
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. So the first question actually comes off from someone called Christopher. Christopher Ocello wants to know, you have indicated temperature cutoff for high risk and low risk. What are your salinity cutoffs, or what salinity cutoffs did you use, if you used any? Slide 6.
All right, so while I navigate to slide 6, I want to just mention that the cutoff we have used is not exactly numeric. So what we have done is to use the base of the freshwater zone as a cutoff for where we expect to move from the low salinity reservoirs into the saline reservoirs. So we have used an arbitrary cutoff based on the trend of the resistivity log per well, and use this to estimate the boundary of the freshwater zone across the fields.
Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. So the next one, are you there?
I'm here, I can hear you.
Okay. So the next question states, this is from Fadikemi. Are the temperatures corrected bottom hole temperatures? Do they plot at the same depth on the wells? I'm not seeing the values clearly. If they are not, are we able to establish the control on the variation so we can have a regional perspective?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. And yes, the temperature logs were corrected, and I'm sure if you want more detail on that, perhaps the petrophysicist might be able to give exact clarity to what kind of correction that you want to find out. But in terms of the temperature, how was that you described the second aspect of the question? In terms of the normalization, is that what you meant? Hello, Latif?
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly what you meant.
All right. So all of them were normalized on a temperature scale, on the same temperature scale. So if, for example, we have the temperature logs in Kwacha, Ariari, and Loti shown, for example, they would all be on the same scale, like you have with a gamma ray of 0 to 150. We can have it at 0 to 120 or thereabout. So that was done for each of them, and so whatever changes you're seeing in the temperature profile is not due to a poor normalization of the log scale. It's actually reflective of what the temperature profiles are per field.
Okay. All right. So we have Colin Zonai. How do we improve on biodegradation reservoirs to obtain a better API?
Sorry?
So I'm reading the question as it is.
Okay.
And it says, how do we improve on our biodegradation reservoirs to obtain API, to obtain better APIs?
That's a very difficult question, and I'm not sure if I am I will attempt to give a response to that though. So biodegradation is a natural phenomenon in the reservoir that will change the quality of your fluid. So it's not exactly like it's something that has been done through artificial processes. We don't control the biodegradation of the subsurface. However, in producing, there are certain things that the company who is interested in producing from biodegraded reservoirs can do, and this would involve artificial lifting to enable your fluids to be produced. But in terms of in situ applications to change biodegradation, I don't believe that's possible yet with the technology we have.
Yeah, I guess just by reducing, increasing viscosity, reducing the density, so I can increase producibility is what you're saying.
Exactly.
All right. So you have another question by Colin. In a high pressure, high temperature reservoir, what temperature should be used as a benchmark in the risk scale?
In a high pressure, high temperature reservoir, you are more or less, I would believe you're more or less in a safe place, because if you remember, and let me try to go back to the slide that shows that. Okay, just hang on, please. I'm trying to navigate.
Okay, don't worry, we are here for you, ma.
Thank you. All right. So in this box here, what we have seen from a lot of studies, and this is not only the study by GANS and all, we have seen generally that when we have reservoir fluids reservoirs that are having temperatures of 80 degrees and above, ordinarily they are sheltered from biodegradation. So you typically have a low risk of biodegradation. So if you're in a high pressure, high temperature reservoir, then you're most likely already going to be having sheltered hydrocarbons. And this is unless you have a situation where perhaps these reservoirs had been biodegraded before they were there was subsidence, and so you're having original biodegradation in a deeper reservoir.
All right.
I hope that
so yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Fadikemi Ogulaye wants to know, are there any considerations regarding the timing of change relative to the reservoir position, its temperature at the time of change from the source rock in your model?
Please, can you repeat that?
Okay. So are there considerations regarding the timing of change relative to the reservoir position, referring to its temperature, at the time of change from source rock in your model?
I'm not absolutely sure I get the context of the question.
All right.
But yeah, but if the question is asking about maybe reservoirs that were biodegraded, that had biodegradation, and then maybe they were buried deeper, then I think that might come back to the previous answer I gave. So if you had original biodegradation and then you got increased deposition and relative subsidence, then you might see that you encounter evidence of biodegraded fluids at a deeper depth than at the original reservoir position at the time of source charge.
So I guess all these questions just lays the credence to the importance of understanding your burial history as you go into this type of assessments. All right, so we have a question from Christopher. Are you considering mixing biodegraded and non-biodegraded oil? This can happen in one reservoir. That's the question.
Well, it can. Yeah, I think yes, it can happen, and that's because the Niger Delta has a complex fill and spill history. So perhaps reservoir charge from a non-biodegraded reservoir that's deeper might mix with a biodegraded reservoir. That's a possibility. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do you feel a study like this will have influence on the industry looking deeper within the Niger Delta? That's from Fadike.
I'm not sure if deeper means looking at deeper reservoirs or if it's used in a different context. But
I think it's physically deeper that they're referring
like deeper reservoirs. Okay, so typically as we go deeper into the subsurface, we're likely to encounter less biodegradation, and that's because of the temperature changes as you go deeper. And we're also maybe going to be seeing evidence of fresh reservoir charge. So you might not be seeing too much risk of biodegradation as you go deeper.
All right. So we'll try to make this fast. Ebenezer Bangoye wants to know, first he says, good presentation, excellent for decision making. My question is, deeper discoveries in some shallow offshore, there are heavy oil in the agbada. What would you say is the reason for this heavy oil, knowing well that there are seals and cap rocks in this interval?
Okay, so to answer that, I think the shallow offshore example that we showed is a typical example of where within the shallow offshore you can see quite a variation in terms of biodegradation, where and in this example we're looking really at the mid to western part of the shallow offshore, and we're seeing that in a 28-kilometer distance from the Kwacha and Ariari, you're having this is almost a 2,000 feet difference in terms of your biodegradation. And so I'm sure there are a lot of postulations as to why. Some of them I mean, some of them might be related to the overburden and maybe temperature equilibration. I don't know exactly the reason, but looking at this example, it shows that it's quite important that you have a case by case analysis of your risk of biodegradation, because if you look at just these two wells, you might assume that, you know, laterally you have the same risk of biodegradation in the depot belt, but from what we can see here, it can actually change quite significantly within the same concession, within the same depot belt.
Okay. The next one has to do with, most of your presentation has been descriptive. However, I see intervals thin and thick that could be mapped for quantitative analysis. Has this been done to review any trends in each of the depot belts?
Okay. Is it possible to ask the person to give better context on what's meant by quantitative and qualitative?
Okay, so Killan, we'll appreciate if you could put some more description in your question. That's Killan. So Christopher again asks, thank you for the interesting talk. Is there any relationship between the depth to the top of the biodegraded zone and the thickness of the beneath formation? Also, you have shown temperature cutoff for low and high risk. Is there, okay, you've answered that one. So thickness of the beneath formation as regards to the top of the biodegraded zone.
Okay. So what I'm going to say is a hypothesis I have, and I mean, it might be disputed by a couple of people, but yeah, I think there is a relationship between the thickness of the benin. As we have seen in the shallow offshore example, the benin is relatively thinner than what you have in the onshore example. The onshore example, you have the benin formation getting as deep as 6,000, 7,000 feet subsea. And given that the Benin sands, I mean, the overburden here, maybe it might have some correlation with temperature and the geothermal gradients. I'm not exactly sure, because that aspect of the work is not 100% researched, but I would say that yes, there is a possibility that there is a relationship between the thicknesses of the Benin sands and the depths of the biodegradation, as well as the thicknesses of the Benin sands, the temperature variation between depot belts where you have thinner and thicker Benin sands, and the equivalent effects on biodegradation. So,
yeah,
and I would appreciate if there's anybody on the call, you know, that wants to speak out and to say something different.
So
That would help
doctor
me.
There. Doctor could probably
Sorry?
pitch in. So doctor can always pitch in.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, indeed.
Yes. Actually, the Benin formation, especially where it is a thick sequence, serves as an insulator for the temperatures in the so-called Agbada formation because of the thickness. And you therefore, so there's indeed a relationship between the thickness and the depth to the occurrence of degradation. So yeah, because it serves as an insulator. If you look at your temperature profiles, we used to have a program called SandTemp. It was incorporated into the basin modeling program for hydrocarbon system analysis. And you can model the temperature, and you always start from the base of the Benin sands. I think it increases down to about 30 degrees centigrade or thereabouts. Yeah. So there is that direct relationship because of the insulating effect. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think this is something that this is what most individuals do. Well, however, there might be new studies that might shed more light. You might never know. All right, so we have Jogun Ogedengbe. He wants to know whether you consider the possibility of recharge that may bring fresh oils into the biodegradation zone. Did you consider that?
Yes, that's always a possibility in the Niger Delta. That's reservoirs receiving fresh charge. However, from what we could see, and this is because we have had data from fluid samples, we could see that, for example, in this example I'm showing here, we could see that from a recently sampled reservoir, relatively recently sampled reservoir, the SETI, we still have a heavy API gravity that more or less ties with the models that we have. So yes, there is possibility of recharging of reservoirs that have biodegraded fluid. But for the sake of this model, what we have seen is that we have a pretty good handshake with what the sampled, the hydrocarbon sampled in the reservoir and our model.
So I guess, but this may also allude to one of your closing remarks, Kelly, about the value add geochemistry can bring to the conversation. Because then by fingerprinting, we can unequivocally be sure that there's no hydrocarbon that's from another source. You know?
Exactly.
All right. No, sorry. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to agree 100% with what you have said, that this is geochemistry. This does not exclude the analysis that the understanding that geochemistry will bring to you. This is one aspect that you can use, especially maybe when you have sparsity of data, you don't really have geochemical analysis, but it does not say that you have this and therefore, it covers what geochemistry would have told you. So always integrate.
Okay, so Danjuma Damina, how effective can this methodology help in maturation fields or maturing fields without any drilled wells separated by over 500 kilometers with the closest producing field? So I guess it's just trying to understand how viable is this approach in a completely exploration scenario.
At the risk of bringing down this some of the things that I've already shared, I'm just going to say that you need well information to be able to predict, because what we have relied on here is gamma ray resistivity and temperatures from drilled wells to be able to predict the trend. But in the case of where you don't have any wells and you want to make an evaluation of your biodegradation, then perhaps that's where a predictive Bayesian model can come in, and not really this kind of approach.
Yeah, but I also
assume Dr. Kenny wants to add something.
Go on, Doctor.
If I may just add to that, you see, the Delta is a unique basin in Nigeria. Some of the questions that about mixing of from different sources and the variations in the geological history about of temperature controls, reservoir temperatures, will be important when you look at the Cretaceous basins, the fringe, the Niger Delta, and continue towards the northeast. There, you have an original petroleum system. The basin has undergone through several phases of inversion, burial and uplift, and your hydrocarbon occurrences in terms of quality of their fluids have gone through various stages. So that particular last question will be more applicable when you are in the inland basin. But like Kelly said, you have to understand the controls, which are basic, but you put it in context of the tectonic histories. I use the word histories of a specific basin of that, so yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Doctor. So, because of time, I'm going to do I won't call it a rapid fire session, but I'll couple a couple of questions, and we'll allow Kelly give it a stab. So we have Adebanija Morufudin. If you categorize the risk on the basis of the behavior of the resistivity log, and without specific value of salinity cutoff, don't you think your proposition would contradict the variation of resistivity with salinity and resistivity variation with temperature? All right, so that's the first one. Without a trend map only depth is available to the explorationist. What other information can be used to clarify the correlation of biodegradation at shallow depths? And clarify correlation between biodegradation at shallow depth with gas scenario. That's from Sunday Moses. And then this is from a past president of NAPE. The upper part of the Agbada formation, interpreted to be the zones of biodegradation, looks more like the transition beneath formation zone. And the base of the freshwater across the wells, was there an attempt made to delineate the transition beneath formation in the study? So let's allow those three questions.
Okay, so I think I'll start from the last question because it's the freshest in my head. So around the transition zone for the seen on the resistivity log. So we took a relatively safe bet in terms of putting the base of the freshwater zone, and what we did was that we used the resistivity information as where we had completely transited from the freshwater into the saltwater. So basically, like at the base of that transition zone. So in the large scale of things, and maybe this is case specific to these examples, we see that the reservoir temperatures actually have a significantly deeper depth than the salinities, to get to the 60 degrees cutoff. So plus or minus that difference between the base of the transition zone and the top of the transition zone may not really have significantly changed our findings. I don't know if that is what was asked, right?
Okay, yeah. Essentially, you accounted for it more or less.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. All right.
So I'm sorry, please. What was the second question?
Without trend maps, only depth is available to the explorationists. What other information can be used? And then clarify the correlation of biodegradation at shallow level with gas scenario.
So biodegradation and gas in the shallow level. So there is a postulation that we might have some biogenic gas in the Niger Delta, and by that I mean like primary biogenic methane. And this postulation was that these could be formed due to action of organic matter on finely dispersed. Hello, can anybody hear me? I think
Loud
my
and
screen
clear.
is frozen. Okay, the action of organic matter on finely dispersed organic matter, so microorganisms on organic matter, and this could lead to primary biogenic methane. The secondary type of biogenic gas that you can encounter as relates to the subject of biodegradation could be secondary methanogenesis, and this was due to thermogenic oil being transformed into biogenic gas. So in the shallow parts of the Niger Delta, these are two possibilities possibilities of how you might encounter gases that are of biogenic origin. I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
so
it
for
does.
Okay. So for the other question regarding trend maps and predicting for biodegradation. So if the depth trend maps, right? Was that what you said? So the depth trend maps. Sorry?
You just said trend maps.
Okay, so for trend maps, if you're talking about trend maps for what's I have already showed for the resistivity and salinity, for the temperatures, then yeah, this is one way that you can use to estimate the depths of biodegradation. Other information maybe can come from geochemical analysis of produced of fluids, sorry, that have been sampled. And perhaps again, I would mention the Bayesian model that can be predictive. So apart from this data, perhaps there are other data that can help, but I'm not. I don't think I have the information right now that I can share to answer that question.
Okay, so the last set of questions from Zoom. It's so we asked Killian to send some clarification he has. So he says you correlated the high resistivity in the Bini formation with fresh water. However, looking in the Agbada, one sees high resistivity spikes. How do you interpret these, for example, in terms of oil-water contact? So that's the first one. So back to the earlier question around quantitative analysis, he or she says, I mean isopac maps of the intervals demarcated in the cross-section. If you identify the same intervals in several wells in the field, you may be able to say whether thick zones and thin areas mean anything, or add your interpretation and conclusion. So that's the implication of the isopacs of those areas you've identified to your inferences is, I guess, what it's trying to find out.
Okay, and how it relates to the results?
Yes,
is that it?
And how it relates to the results.
Okay, so related, if I will take the question on the spikes first of all. So yeah, those spikes, most of them represent presence of hydrocarbon in the reservoirs, while the excursion to the top is related to the presence of fresh water. And again, this is usually related to how the resistivity logs are calibrated. Sorry, the resistivity tool is calibrated and how it gives results in terms of your resistivity logs. So yeah, the spikes below are related to hydrocarbon fluid. Now, I am not exactly sure as to what you mean by the gas oil or oil water contact. When you talk about the second part of that question on the spikes.
Okay, so I guess it's trying to find out that there will be your resistivity log will react to the transition between the fluids. And how do you ensure that that's impact on the resistivity log is not captured to influence your inferences as regards biodegradation?
Yeah, so in the shallow section, I mean, when we're looking at the Benin sands, we typically don't expect to see reservoirs that are hydrocarbon filled. Maybe there might be exceptions in some specific areas, but in the shallow sections, like you can see here, where you have thick sands, you ordinarily do not see a lot of reservoirs that contain oil and gas. So most of the behavior of the resistivity tool in reading the formation fluid is going to be attributed to salinity, and this is why it's been used as a proxy for understanding where your salinity zones change from freshwater into saltwater. Deeper, we don't expect to see freshwater. We're going to be having spikes that are attributed to hydrocarbon fluids.
Okay, so your last and final question comes from Facebook. We have Ahmed Yawale Baba. He wants to know, heavy oil can be formed and migrate naturally during maturity. How did you conclude the fluids in your work are actually biodegraded? Bacterial effects. So that's his question.
Okay, so if I get his question correctly, I think he's saying that sometimes the source rock might generate heavy oils. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, and then there is a risk that we might be conflating heavy oils due to the source rock, and okay, so
No.
And heavy oils that
Hello?
are due to the to biodegradation. So from what we have seen, and anybody can correct me if they have a different understanding, we typically don't see heavy oils from the kitchens of the Niger Delta. So typically the oils the oils tend to be of API gravity that are not heavy. So when there is a change in that, in terms of the fluids that we have sampled, then we think that it is more related to a secondary H change, which is where biodegradation comes in. So when we see in our shallower reservoirs that we're having fluids that are relatively heavy, we believe that most of these have been altered secondarily. Then apart from that, from a lot of the research that has been done, there's usually also, when you look at the geochemical analysis, there's usually also some associated there are associated products like the sulfur content, the acidity, and all of those things, and that would typically give an indication that this has been an altered fluid. And also when the geochemists also analyze the profile of the fluids, there are usually some indications in the GC profile that can give a pointer to biodegradation. And all of these have usually been seen from analysis of fluids that have been tested in the Niger Delta. So typically, if it's heavy, it's more likely to be due to biodegradation than from a source rock producing heavy oils.
All right, and thank you for surviving our quite elaborate question and answer session. My chairman, sir, Dr. Ladipo, over to you for your closing remarks on this conversation.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Your questions, the questions have been very intense, and it's amazing how your responses to it has been. One last closing remark that I'd like to share with everybody. There's an extensive database on our subsurface, from our subsurface studies in the Niger Delta. Apart from temperature, salinity data, log data, reservoir data, there's also quite a lot of geochemical data, which enables you to not only look at the geochemical array from the various oils that have been sampled, you can also improve your predictive models from it. So what I'm hoping for is that we can encourage our geochemists to work together to create not just a 1D or a 2D like you have shown, but also a 3D model so that we can enhance our predictive capability from the wide array of well well data, log data, reservoir data, geochemical analysis data, and incorporate it into basin modeling for hydrocarbon system analysis, so that this kind of predictive work, which you have demonstrated here, can be extended in a 3D sense. I'd like to congratulate you and your team. And honestly, I look forward to much more of this. And from my own part, executive of NAPE and Shell, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to chair this event. Thank you very much. Over to you, Abdul Latif.
All right, thank you, my chairman. I'm going to ask the president to appreciate both the guest speaker and the chairman for today. Mr. President.
Okay, PS, thank you very much. I want to sincerely, on behalf of NAPE Executive Committee and the entire membership, appreciate the speaker for today's event, ability to tackle, to handle a critical presentation of this nature, and answer questions with confidence gives some of us hope that there's still a lot of hope as we approach retirement age, that we have people to hand over to. If we're very proud of you. We're very proud of you. You've done well.
Thank you very much, sir.
The chairman for today's event, without which we wouldn't have been able to hold this event, sir. In spite of the short notice, you are always there for us. A distinguished fellow of this association, very distinguished. So we're very proud of you for all your services to this association in so many areas, to NAPE, to the academia, to the industry. It's only God that will reward you.
Thank you.
May your generation be increased.
Thank you.
We're very proud of what you have made this event, the success you have put in. We appreciate the sponsors of today's event. Without share represented by Mr. Gogo Eneyok, GM Exploration, we wouldn't have been able to hold this event of today. I want to especially extend our appreciation to Share. This is one of the best presentations for the year. And I want the speaker to also know that we had about 227 participants globally, Europe, US, Canada, listening to you. This is what has become of NAPE. A presentation at any location could be attended globally. And you can see that we're advertising Share. The logo is there. Behind me is deliberate. It's part of our appreciation to our sponsors. This is the new NAPE. We have refused to be weighed down by COVID and the lockdown. We had to move on. DPR director said if NAPE was a bird, NAPE is supposed to have been an eagle, ability to weather the storm. We're excited that in the midst of all the challenges, you've been there for us, giving all the support and helping us to succeed. It has helped to reduce depression among our members. These programs, your sponsorship, the web package presentation, and all that you have done to make this a success has big impact to the industry and especially our members, that some will have been depressed by now. We appreciate and we wish you all the best. We wish the chairman for today's event. Efe, we wish you a fantastic career in Share. You are a big asset to Share. and they will continue to reward you as you progress, shining and lifting the flag of Shell and the industry.
All right. Thank you, my
very
president.
much, sir.
Let's have the sponsor's remark. Over to you, the General Manager, Exploration Shell, Mr. Gogo Eneyo.
Can you confirm you can hear me, please?
Loud and clear.
Oh, thank you so very much, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. And if you're in the West, good morning. Honorable delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm a delegate from Shell Nigeria. I just want to thank everyone so much for being here. Really good to see particularly our chairman and special guest, Dr. Ladipo. It's a pleasure seeing you, sir. President Taka, thanks for the good words. President-elect Pato Chubor, really good to see you again. And our publicity secretary, Latif, good to see you all. We do really miss the normal. The old normal, it seems to have gone so far away over the years when you think about it from now. Well, it does feel, nostalgic to just think about a conference of this nature that we're not seeing our friends, shaking hands, and connecting with one another. We now live in these extraordinary times, which President Taka really spoke, very clearly about with COVID-19. But what is really good is the fact that we've adjusted both professionally and personally. We've fused together both our workspaces and our living spaces. And we yet find the time to attend this kind of conference, right? I think with over 200 persons, it does speak a lot to the resilience and flexibility of NAPE. I therefore would like to just use this opportunity to thank NAPE for its consistency despite the challenges of the pandemic, keeping decades of commitment to sustain and to shape the future of geosciences in the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, promoting the practice of petroleum geosciences anchored on knowledge, sharing the noble ideas that we picked up from our experiences in the industry to build our nation, Nigeria. Thank you, NAPE. I also want to appreciate all the delegates for the way we have individually committed to this conference. Thank you. We appreciate all that you are doing personally and collectively. And we wish that you continue to do so despite the challenges occasioned by the pandemic. May I thank NAPE for giving Shell the opportunity to sponsor the October edition of NAPE Monthly Technical Meeting. The Shell companies in Nigeria includes Shell Nigeria Gas, SNG, Shell Petroleum Development Company, SPDC, and Shell Nigeria Exploration and Production Company, SNEPCO. I am sure most of you participants would have heard about one or several of these, and there are other companies of Shell in Nigeria. I don't want to mention them. The presenter herself is one of our very own, an upcoming exploration geoscientist, Kelly Umeogu. Really study fielding a broad range of questions, and I'm very proud to be a participant. At Shell, just to mention a few, we take particular pride in developing talents. I am very sure you will agree with me that Kelly and our peers across the petroleum industry represent a bright future for NAPE and Nigeria. We also recognize NAPE as a positive force in advancing both social and technical interaction among professional colleagues. And we hope to continue to provide our corporate support and partnership to advance this cause. I wish to thank the Executive Committee of NAPE for the leadership in steering the various activities, especially today's event, despite the challenges of today. And to all delegates, please look after yourselves and continue to look out for others around you. I wish NAPE the very best, and thank you for your participation today. Thank you, Latif. Thank you, Executive. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shell. All right, so we want to just make a couple of few announcements. I think I don't need to tell you what the big thing is. The big thing right now is our conference. We'll be hosting, like I tell everybody, the first virtual conference and exhibition in the oil and gas space, in the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. It's not been done before. We'll be having a genuinely highly packed event that will take you through our special events from the conference workshop to our opening ceremony, management session, all the way to our awards nights. As we do that, we will be walking you through multiple exhibitors through our exhibition. And of course, we'll be sharing with you the latest in technology and best practices across the world with our technical programs and events. This is something I do not believe you want to miss. The theme of the conference was put together before the pandemic, but it is clear that it is even more important right now than ever before. How do we accelerate the growth of our carbon reserves? What are those emerging concepts, challenges, and opportunities? It is something you don't want to miss. And just to kickstart that conversation about the conference, I think it's important that everybody knows about the short courses. It's now available. There are 2 of them. One of them is focused on practical approach for fault seal and risk assessment. And the second one has to do with geopressure prediction and exploration setting. As you can see, it's very clear that as explorationists, we are well suited for pressure. And the pandemic cannot hold us back. The registration fee is 20,000 naira. There are details there. You can find that on our online resources everywhere. And it's something I believe you should not miss. Again, thank you all. I'm going to hand over back to the president to give his very grateful closing remarks. Mr. President, are you there, sir?
Yes, thank you very much for a wonderful package together with your team. I want to sincerely thank the PE in particular for consistently working so hard behind the scene in selecting, getting sponsorship, packaging speakers, chairmen of sessions, this being one of our best and the likely last technical session for the year. It is well received. I want to appreciate once again the speaker, the sponsors, our chairman, all executive committee members that have made time to be a part of this presentation, the vice president, the general secretary, UAP chair, UCC, UK Europe, chapter coordinators, our distinguished fellows. I saw a reasonable number of them in this meeting. We appreciate you and your time. We appreciate every participant that made time to be a part of this historic event of today. Technical sessions of this type are not common. I want to believe each and every one must have learned something new. I want to encourage us to follow up with NAPI. We have several platforms. Follow up with NAPI, and let's witness the first virtual international conference together. It's going to be memorable. You can't afford to be told what happened. You just need to witness it yourself and to fully participate. We are not going to cancel any of these events. We will forge ahead. If we make mistakes along the way, we are ready to learn from our mistakes and move on. We appreciate each and every one for being a part of this. We promise that every event of the conference, from pre-conference field trip, that will be virtual, and all other events will be worth being a part of. Please be on the watch out. NAPI is on so many platforms. NAPE is being followed worldwide. Don't miss out. Be with us from now till 19th of November at the awards night and the closing ceremonies for the conference. It's going to be grand. It's going to be memorable. Once again, on behalf of the ESCO and the entire membership, we appreciate each and every one, most especially our special staff at the NAPE Secretariat, who works day and night to make events of this nature a success. We appreciate each and every one that has been a part of today's event. Thank you. Have a blessed day and a memorable week ahead. God bless.